Hello and welcome. Welcome. I hope you're having a good day. If you're watching this live, I hope you are having a good day if you watch the recording of this podcast episode. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the political classes and in particular, I wanted to consider whether we actually can trust any of them. And I don't want to be too bleak about that. I don't want to be bleak at all, in fact. I want to be optimistic. But I also think that we have to be realistically optimistic or optimistically realistic. We've got to be careful. We've got to think and observe and look at behaviours. Recently, when I was talking about the political classes, I was suggesting that maybe in fact, I'll tell you what I was doing. I was actually commenting over a recording of Prime Minister's questions, and this was the one where Kemi Badenoch was jousting with Keir Starmer. And it was very interesting because Keir Starmer didn't answer any questions directly, and Kemi Badenoch was basically asking him for his thoughts about the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding women. And it was in many ways unedifying, but it was also, I would say, illuminating. It was illuminating because what we had a situation where, yet again, a politician, in this case a Prime Minister, flatly refused. He didn't say, I'm refusing to answer questions, but he did refuse to answer questions because he didn't answer them, and he knew what he was doing, because he would use a deflection technique and then try and get people focused on another issue that was quite emotional, and the language and subject matter that he chose was such that most people would agree with it. And that's great, that's good, but I didn't answer the question. And during that particular part of Prime Minister's questions, there was a close-up of Nigel Farage laughing to, amidst some colleagues who were also having a laugh about something. And I really got the impression, and maybe you've had this impression before, that this was a big club and you haven't been invited, and neither have I. And when I looked at them, I wasn't sure whether they actually cared. Now, I have some hope about Kemi Badenoch. I have hope because I think I see humanity there. I just get a sort of machine-like quality, a robotic quality from Keir, but maybe I'm wrong. In terms of Nigel Farage, when I look at him, and there's also, you may recall, a video of Keir and Nigel having a bit of a laugh in the House of Commons, I think it was, a bit of a conversation. Because again, it's a club, and behind the scenes, most of the time, they're quite civil to one another, which is good, and yet one wonders how much of this is performative that we see, how much of it is pantomime. And again, without getting into big conspiracy theories, because some of these politicians really don't like each other. But it also seems to me that maybe they've got to work within certain parameters to ascend the slippery pole of advancement, and maybe they cannot be too extreme in their views. And of course, I don't mean extremism, I just mean too far away from the centre. And it kind of makes sense in some ways. But anyway, what I was starting to say is, so when I look at Nigel, I see someone who's an extremely good communicator, but also he's unproven. He's unproven in a leadership role like a Prime Minister's leadership role is. Keir Starmer was an unknown quantity, and I and many other people were very worried about such an unknown quantity coming into power. And he did And I think those fears have been founded rather than unfounded for a lot of us. Kemi Badenoch, I'm more optimistic, but I don't know. And in terms of that humanistic quality regarding Nigel, oh yes, to a degree, I think that there's someone there who's fleshed out, who's a three-dimensional individual. He doesn't seem to be as static and mechanistic as Keir, and yet, will he deliver? So let me just then let us look at a couple of articles that I thought may be interesting to go over. So this is from Edge Media, and obviously it's about Nige. And so it says, not the Messiah. So why is Farage's following soaring? Now note that this is by Hazel Scott. I'm only going to look at a couple of the headlines on this, by the way, because as always, somebody worked hard to produce this, and therefore I don't want to be saying, hey, I'm going to nick all of it. I'll read out some headlines, and if you're interested more in what this individual, there's also another article that I'll share as well. So both of those authors, if you're interested, then have a look. Because people, as I say, they work hard to produce these things, and probably with deadlines. But anyway, this is from July last year. So what's that? Roughly, approximately 9 months ago. And it says, Farage's influence is on the rise, attracting disillusioned voters who feel let down by traditional parties. Why is his following growing so rapidly? Now, there's been a couple of glitches and little bumps in the road since then, but it's a very good question. And it is worth bearing in mind that one of the reasons that Labour had such a large victory, some would say a victory at all, was the disillusionment that a lot of people had with the Tories, unsurprisingly. What a mess, what an unmitigated disaster. And now that people have had a little bit of a taste of Labour and Keir, they're just, I think that jaded quality, well, it's still there, and I suspect it's gotten worse. So, why, however, is following growing so rapidly? Disillusionment with mainstream parties, number one. So it's not just Labour that benefited with the disillusionment, again, in the UK at least, about the Tories, but I think there is a malaise generally in terms of how people feel about politicians and politics. And also here, number two, and I'm going to bring a couple. You see Brexit advocacy there. I wasn't going to linger on that particularly. Clear messaging. Farage's straightforward, often blunt messaging cuts through the perceived waffle of mainstream politics, attracting those who crave clarity. Well, that would be everyone then, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? I mean, the majority of us want clarity. It's this doublespeak, and as I said already, this inability to answer a question, which I believe that, as far as I'm aware, in Parliament, they don't have to in most circumstances, or at least the Prime Minister doesn't have to. And a lot of Prime Ministers haven't asked questions, but it is particularly odd and kind of strange, and I believe needs an overhaul. But anyway, Farage is or can be straightforward. It mentions Brexit there. I don't know what it's going to say. His unwavering commitment to Brexit continues to resonate with those who feel other leaders have compromised too much on the issue. So it resonates still. I don't think this is big an issue or at least a draw these days. I wasn't going to go down here, but seeing as I've scrolled down this far, populist appeal. He connects by addressing the common man, so to speak. And you can see actually right now that Kemi will also do that. She is astute enough to pick up that there is a feeling that the common man, or perhaps I should say common human, is not being listened to. And of course, there's a lot of variation in the country in terms of people. They're all unique, but there is that sense for many, many, many people that they're not being listened to. When Farage seems to talk to them, this appeals. And I think Kemi's been doing that to a degree. And also Keir has been flexing on bits and pieces, realising that even though it might be his will and do as I say, not as I do, and I'm here to command and control, well, the natives, they are revolting. And what did I say? They're media savvy. That was the last one. So if you saw that flash up and think, what was that last one? I think it's the last one. No, it goes on. It goes on. So he uses social media and uses media savvy. I was only going to concentrate on the first couple. But seeing as how we're here, as I say, I mention those. And he certainly is media savvy, but they all are. They all are. The sound bites, the script writers, the jumping on the bandwagon to whatever that may be, what's hitting the headlines. Yes, of course. But however, no doubt Farage also is media savvy. Then let's look here at this article. This is by Frederica Calabro. Paul Novak, Farage pretends to champion working class people. So we've got the first article where essentially we are reading that Farage kind of has his finger on the pulse a lot of the time. He has this appeal. He seems to talk to the ordinary citizen, and also he has an ability to communicate well, cut through the fluff, all of that stuff. But here, criticism. And just in case you don't know who Paul Novak is, he is essentially a hugely important union chief, TUC chief, as it says there. He's criticised Reform, a UK leader, as a political fraud, accusing him of fake working class support. As reported by The Guardian, Paul Novak, the UK's leading union figure, labelled Farage a political fraud and a hypocrite for cosplaying, that's quite funny, isn't it, as a working class supporter to gain votes in the local elections. And when I say funny, I mean it's funny to call him a cosplayer. That is funny, but the fact that he may be a fraud and a hypocrite isn't funny. I hope he isn't, but we're hearing it, reading it here. Why did Paul say such things? He dismissed Farage's efforts to align with trade unions, highlighting significant contradictions in his stances on workers' rights, industry, and the economy. He urged voters not to be deceived by Reform. Now, these contradictions could be because there is deception, and maybe it is deliberate deception, but it could also be because Nigel isn't actually used to working in this slightly more rarefied atmosphere as he claws and strives towards becoming the Prime Minister. He's finding out, perhaps this is what's going on, in many ways what Keir Starmer has been finding out, that it isn't as simple as being ruthless behind the scenes and being expedient in terms of where you position your focus and energy, and also being expedient in what you appear to believe at any one point in time. People aren't dumb. People are smart. People watch. They're jaded, remember? They have had enough of that nonsense. And so perhaps what we're seeing here is Farage realising that actually he's got to be consistent in what he's saying and also not to be contradictory in terms of his values and beliefs. And maybe he's just said things shooting from the hip, and that's his style, and it didn't matter before, but now he's under much more scrutiny. Maybe, and I hope that's the case. Just, whether you're a Farage fan or not, I hope it's the case, because I want people who are in positions of influence in this country and other countries to be honest, straightforward, and decent. So then the article goes on. They got 4 million votes at the last election. Of course, there's a lot of delusionment with mainstream politics. So of course they got 4 million because of that disillusionment, which is what we saw with Labour in terms of them getting in, at least with such a high majority. There isn't a bandwagon that the fellow isn't prepared to jump aboard if he thinks it's going to result in more votes. I think people will see that lack of consistency, lack of political honesty, and lack of coherence. He promises all things to all people. And in many ways, there are echoes also of Labour and Keir Starmer before they got into number 10, before he did, at least. Similar things. And then I'll finish off with this little quote from Paul. I get why people might be attracted in the short term. I think it's partly my job to say to people, well, don't just listen to what he says, look at what he does. He's directly voting against the interests of millions of working class people, which I think is scary if true. I can't immediately go on and fact check that, but unfortunately, given the track record of many politicians so far, it could be true, or at least the opinion of some people could be that is true, because obviously this is Paul's opinion, and I'm not contradicting it. I don't know, but I certainly would pay attention to what he's saying, because he is an influential figure and he's not daft, and he kind of knows this game, or the game that the politicians play. And what I would just finish off with in terms of this article is this little bit here. Mr. Novak's remarks on Mr. Farage mark the most personal to date from the Labour movement ahead of the election. So he's making, at this point in time, this is Paul Novak, the most personal remarks about Nigel Farage from the Labour movement to date, ahead of the election, calling him a political fraud and a hypocrite. And this is the line, I guess, I was focused on, adding that he makes Liz Truss seem like a politician of integrity. Interesting, isn't it? And kind of worrying and kind of depressing. And because I skipped down on all that, I don't think he wants a sensible relationship with trade unions any more than I think he cares about the interests of British workers or industry or those working class communities. And maybe this is a stance from Paul. Maybe he's saying, I'm firing a shot across your bows, Farage, because I have quite a lot of clout. I can generate a lot of ink in terms of headlines, and therefore he's saying I don't think he wants a sensible relationship, because he wants him to have a sensible relationship, and he wants him to care about the interests of British workers or industry or those working class communities. And my goodness, somebody has to, do they not? Because I think there is a huge quantity of the population who feel, again, to come back to what I was saying already, that they have been ignored, that literally they are in a position of almost being invisible within the country. And that, I think, is awful. That, I think, is grim. So to then attempt to be a bit hopeful about that, if you were hopeful about Farage, I'm not saying don't be, but I think the advice about, just watch, be careful, be circumspect is useful. Same with Kemi Badenoch. Same, of course, with Keir Starmer. But I think a lot of people are aware of that now. So, should we swallow anything hook, line and sinker? No, absolutely not. What about the hope then? Well, the hope is this. Because the population were jaded, because the population had had enough of the fluff and the doublespeak, and also the lies and the hypocrisy from Labour and before them, the Tories, and now maybe Farage. I mean, I really hope not. And with a new Tory leader, again, can we be hopeful? I think we have to have hope that what we're going to see either because they are like that or because they realize the only way they are going to get a majority of anything at all is to do what the people want, the will of the people. Now, I'm not straying too far into populism, because if the people want X, Y, Z and there is no money to do that, then it would be a lie, and it would be absolutely wrong and immoral to say that someone could do that when they couldn't. My version of populism is, or my interpretation of it, I should say, is that people will listen to what the populists have to say, what the concerns are, and do their darndest to make that actually happen, to manifest those things. And they will be transparent in their dealings. Their language will be straightforward. And they will also, either because it is inherently there or because eyes are upon them, and if they veer off the path, then it's going to be another disaster and a real awful period for the country. That either because it's within them or they're acting that way, that they will align with the moral compass that most of us want these leaders to be aligned with, to do the right thing, to care about people, to understand that they are there to serve, not the other way around. None of us are interested in a dictatorship. We've had enough of people bestriding the world stage and the photo ops and the little meetings and the jetting left, right and centre. What is it they're doing? What are they achieving? I appreciate some things will be behind the scenes and some things probably are good, but there's this sense of them and us. There's this sense of the in-group, there is the party that I mentioned already, not the political party, but literally the fact that they are part of a group that you and I are not in. And maybe I should call it a party, because it sometimes looks like it's great fun. Little drinks together and little conversations and little laughs. And that's okay, high-pressured job, as long as you remember that you're there to serve. So as far as I'm concerned, the jury is out with Nigel. I'm really not sure. Some of the things he talks about, I think, are interesting. Some of the things that his perspective is, at least some things that he has a perspective on, I don't agree with. Some things he has a perspective on, I do agree with. But it's the same with Kemi Badenoch. And even Keir Starmer, although I do question his ability as a leader. I don't think he is a leader in any sense that I would understand leadership. But some things that he says, yeah, I would agree with. However, I don't get the sense that he's there to serve. Jury's out with Kemi. I have hope, but I'm really not sure. Nigel, again, probably the biggest question mark is over Nigel when you compare him and Kemi. Partly because he's been used to running very successful campaigns, but being a Prime Minister is a totally different thing. So we have to hope, we have to pray that these leaders understand that we expect moral courage, to quote from Prime Minister's questions a few days ago, and we expect ethical behaviour, and we expect things to be done in the sunlight, not in the shadows, not things that we do in the shadows. Sunlight, the best disinfectant, transparency, openness, honesty, explanation. Why are you doing what you're doing? Is that so much to ask? As I said the other day when I looked at Prime Minister's questions and the inability to answer a question, or the refusal to answer a question, if we were the shareholders looking at a board meeting and that was going on, then people would be sacked. Possibly all of them, but certainly Keir. It's just unacceptable. We seem to have been sleepwalking into this, where we just go, well, that's what politics is. Why is it like that? I understand the theatre. I understand the fact that we don't want it to descend into some physical altercation. Of course not. And so there is a bit of performance to it. Yes, and that can be good, and it is civilised. But when we literally are not getting questions answered, what is the point of it? To show off? To show how eloquent and elegant a speaker we can be? Is it actually addressing what the people care about? I don't think so. And I'm sure some very experienced political commentators could say, well, yeah, but you understand what they don't say, what they mean to say, and so on. But I come back to, if that was a board, if that was a leader, they would be removed. We deserve better. And so, at the moment, the two kind of front runners, it would seem, are Kemi and Nigel. Do you know how to win? Do you know really how to win? Be honest, be transparent, be moral, be ethical, listen, do what you can to address the concerns of the population, and when you can't do it, be upfront and explain why. Again, is that too much to ask? It sounds quite straightforward. For some reason, it seems to be quite difficult for a lot of politicians. But if they did that stuff, that very, very, very straightforward stuff, just behaving like you and I would hope that we would behave on a regular basis and would want people to behave to us, towards us, the people at the top, so-called, of the country, surely we can expect them to behave like that as well. And if they can't, what are we doing? What a lot of nonsense, and how depressing. But I come back to, I have hope about this. I really do, because I think that they are now under such scrutiny, and I think expectations are so high, and people have had enough, that it would be, well, I am going to choose my language carefully here. It would be a disaster for any leader or party who tried to continue down the road of waffle, obfuscation, shady stuff going on behind the scenes, not paying attention to what the population care about, and calling it populism or whatever. Any politician, any party who tries that now, again, I think they will just disappear. They're likely to not exist. A leader who can grab some of the simple approaches and strategies that I've talked about, again, very simple: honesty, openness, integrity. It was mentioned in that article that I read that the word integrity was there. Integrity, what's integrity? It is doing the right thing, even when no one else is looking. And that means not accepting free gifts. Oops, I said it. There's one thing. Anyway, for the moment, from me, bye for now.